Hi, Linda Goodall here from Lindy G Embroidery. Lately I've been on a table runner binge making designs from this collection, Feathered Quilt Blocks. So this collection has 12 feathered quilt blocks. Now, I can tell you that I am no good at free motion quilting. So digitizing is the way I'm going to go. That way I can have perfect curves and perfect, unique, and symmetrical designs. So this has 12 blocks. They're in 4 different sizes. If we look at the back, you can see all 12. And what you're going to do is you're just going to pick the size that works for your project. So the sizes are 130 millimeter, 150, 200, and 240 for the new giant machines. Now, if you only speak inches, that's 5 inches, 6 inches, 8 inches, and 9.5 inches. So the designs on this purple and gold one are the 240 millimeter designs. They're at the maximum size. These two are done with smaller designs, but I've done a little bit of editing to make them spread out a little bit more and to do the coloring on these. So I do have 2 other videos on how to edit these designs in your software. And what I'd like to point out is this looks like perfect piecing. This is not piecing at all. This is ink. So I'm going to have a video on how to separate the designs for this version, how to separate the designs for this version, and another one on how to ink. So stay tuned for those. Now let's talk a little bit more about this one. Actually, all 3 of these use a piece as you go technique, and it's pretty easy to do, and I'm going to show you how to do that in this video. So that's what we're going to focus on here, how to put the blocks together after we've embroidered them. So first, let's talk about embroidering them. So here's some blocks I've embroidered, and I want to point out that I've hooped my fabric, top fabric, my batting, and my backing all together in the hoop. Now, I'm hooping them between the rings of the hoop. I am not floating these because you want to have maximum registration. And you're going to get the best registration when everything is held between the rings of the hoop. That's what the hoop is for. It's for stabilizing. Now, granted, these are low impact designs, but this is a big design. And when you have these long straight areas on your hoop, it tends to slip a bit more. So you want to have the best registration. Now on these blocks, I've used metallic thread. So on the yellow blocks, I've used purple thread, and on the purple blocks, I've used gold thread. And this is the soft light metallic thread, and you'll also find this in our shopping cart. But I also want to point out the backs. So if I move these backs over here, you can see that this purple one, because I have a light colored thread, a gold colored thread, and a gold colored fabric, and white bobbin thread, it looks pretty bland back here. It's not very visible. But on this one, you can see little flecks of purple. And that's just going to happen because that's the way machine embroidery looks. You're going to pull the top thread to the back, and you're going to see more thread on the back. So don't expect a really pretty back. The best way to hide your back is to have a really busy background, or one that matches your top fabric a little bit more. So now let's talk about how to put these together. So if I flip this one over, you can see that, well, let me unpin this up here. I have a little flap that gets sewn down over the seam allowances, because what I'm doing here is I'm sewing this block to this block through the front and back and batting of this block and the front and batting of this block. And I don't want to have exposed seams back here, so I've left a little extension here, and I folded over my fabric. I don't know if you can see that. And I'm just going to fold that down, and now I can either stitch in the ditch on the front, or I can hand stitch. And on this one I've hand stitched down here, and this is not very long, and so I would just hand stitch these. And that's how I've done the backs of these. Now on this particular table runner, all we're going to have is just one row of these. We're not going to be matching up rows of blocks. So let me point out something if you're making a quilt. Let me move these over a bit. You can see these. You can really see how that white bobbin, that white top thread shows up on the back of this one, even though I've used black bobbin thread. Now what I would probably do on here is I would alternate the direction of those seams. So if we can get the cameraman to move over a bit. We have a seam going We want to flip one this way and one that way so that they're matching like this rather than like this. That way it will reduce the amount of bulk you would have if you were doing rows and rows of blocks for making a quilt. So now let's walk through the process of putting those blocks together. So I've got 3 blocks assembled and I'm ready to attach my next block. So if we look at this, you can see that I'm alternating blocks here. I'm alternating purple, gold, purple, and then I have another gold one and another purple one to add on. Now let's talk about how I've trimmed the block. So what I've done is when I've trimmed my block, I've left a 1-inch extra margin around here. And I've decided that I'm going to have about, maybe 1/2 to 3/8 of an inch from my block to my seam line. Now that doesn't mean we're going to have a 1/2 inch seam. We're going to do some trimming and we have to allow for that extension. Also, when you trim your blocks, you want to make sure you're trimming them all to the right size. So just so you're making them 1 inch bigger than the design may not mean that all of them are the exact same size, because we've used 5 different designs on this particular block. So let's go over again what I'm going to do to have to trim. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this block to this one, but this one is going to be the one that has the little extension flap on the back. So I need to trim off 1/4 of an inch on this side and 1/4 of an inch on this side, but on this one, only the top and the batting. I don't want to trim this back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold that back behind when I do my trimming. So I'm just going to lay my ruler over and I'm going to do my trimming, and we'll do that in just a moment. So once I have it trimmed, then I'll put all of those layers together and I'll sew. So let's do our trimming. So now what I need to do is trim 1/4 of an inch off my purple block that's already been attached. And if you're good at eyeballing, you can just eyeball 1/4 of an inch. When you've been quilting for a while, you'll know 1/4 of an inch. But if you're not, you can take another ruler and line that up 1/4 inch up along the edge and then pull it away when you've got it straightened. And you're just going to cut that off and throw it on the floor. So now on the other one, we need to have that extension. And what I've done here is I've already folded back that seam allowance there, 1/4 inch, and I've pressed it so we don't have to do it on camera. And I'm going to fold that out of the way. I'm going to put that down. I need to actually turn it around this way to cut because I'm right-handed. And once again, you're going to line up your rulers. And, you can check it this way. This is kind of klutzy because it's not level. And we're good. And I'm going to cut that off. And did I say make sure your backing is folded away, because you do not want to cut through this part. Now we're ready to put the seams together and stitch them. So now we're ready to stitch our blocks together. I'm going to put my 2 blocks together, right sides together. And there's my folded under extension piece. I'm going to line up those sides. And you're going to be stitching through 5 layers here. So you've got the back of the one block, its batting, the front of that block, the front of this block, and its batting. And then we're going to make sure that we don't sew this part in. So we're going to sew 1/4 inch seam allowance on this one. So let me do that and I'll be right back. So I've sewn my 1/4 inch seam, and we have all this bulk in here, which is pretty thick. And so what I want to do is I'm going to trim out some of this batting. And you're going to just take some sharp scissors and just kind of open up that seam and trim it out. And I won't make you watch me trim out all of it, because you'll get the idea pretty quickly. And you're just going to trim, and you want to make sure that you don't accidentally cut into your quilt, which is pretty easy to do. So just give yourself some small, sharp scissors and trim it out. Now you might actually even be able to pull it out like this. This is cotton batting, so this actually works even better. I think I like this idea better. But just pull it out, and that will thin it out too. And there are other ways of doing this. Some people like to pre-trim the batting and then they'll fuse down the edge with some fusible interfacing strips. So that's another alternative. This side's a little easier to cut. And so I'll just finish cutting this, and when we come back, I'll show you how to finish the seam. So I've trimmed out my excess bulk with getting rid of that batting, and so I now have a pretty smooth seam there. I'm going to press it over towards my new block and the extension, then I'll fold over that, and I'll just hand stitch. Now, if you're allergic to hand stitching, you don't like to do that, you can top stitch from the front, stitch in the ditch, and because this overlaps that seam, you'll be able to catch that on the edge. Now, one final thing I like to do when I have all my blocks assembled is to make a label. And so I'm going to make a label, and I'm going to attach it down here in the corner. And this is a Dean script. This is my favorite font for labeling, and it's a BX font. So if you have Embrilliance, any Embrilliance product actually, you can download this, drop it into Embrilliance, and then just type, rather than trying to line up all these characters and get them all straight. So once I have my label in place, then I'm going to bind it. And I'm going to use a purple binding. This is all bias cut and double folded, so I'll just stitch that on the front, flip it over the back, and finish it however you want to finish it. And that's really all you need to do to finish these. So when you're doing all this quilting with your embroidery machine, it makes these blocks go so fast. You can make these up pretty fast. Now the inked ones do take a little longer because obviously you have to take time out to ink. And I'll show you how to do the inking in a separate video. So join us then.